Hey folks, how you doing today? Just thought I would hop on this afternoon, have a quick chat with everybody. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Hit the like button if you can. Hit the subscribe button if you can. Hit the notifications bell if you're already subscribed so you find out every time we want to do an exciting one of these lives. Always love to have a conversation with this lovely community that we've got here. And I got to tell you, there are some great things coming up on this YouTube channel in the next few days. Great things are happening. I just had a great conversation with Dan Kovalik. Dan Kovalik is a great writer. He's a human rights lawyer. He's a former leader of the Steelworkers Union. He was the staff lawyer for the United Steelworkers for a long time. And he just wrote a book about liberal military interventionism and the lies. And so we just had a great conversation. Just an amazing conversation we just had. So it's going to be posted. So keep your eye out for it later today. Great stuff. And a lot of good things are happening. A lot of good things are happening. A lot of good developments are happening. It is a frustrating situation in the world. But yes, if you are just joining us now, if you are coming onto this live, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. And the more we spread the word, and I am really depending on all of you to spread the word. The more that you spread the word, the bigger our community is going to get, right? The more people will be involved with what we're doing here and the exciting things that we're doing here. So please post this on Reddit. Shout out to the folks who've been posting this across Reddit. I thank you for your work. Please post this on your Facebook. Please post this on Twitter. Please spread the word and make this a bigger conversation. The more people here, the more fun we have. Now, folks, the country of Yemen gets forgotten. People forget about Yemen, right? It's a very impoverished country on the other side of the planet. But it's weird that it has been so forgotten because there's a war going on in Yemen. And the people of Yemen are fighting for their lives against an onslaught. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has the fourth largest military budget in the world, and it is continuing to unload missiles, weapons, ground troops onto Yemen. People are dying. We found out that the UN has been distributing food and medicine in Yemen that's expired. So it's been making people ill. They've been eating, food that's expired. They've been getting medicine that's expired. So the UN has been a little bit in dereliction of duty, but the people of Yemen are resisting. There's a particular passage from Mao Zedong that I'll often quote. He says, "The people of a small country can surely defeat aggression by a big country, but only if they dare to rise and struggle. This is a law of history." And Yemen is absolutely a testament to what Mao Zedong was talking about when he wrote those words. Because the people of Yemen have been resisting. Since 2015, they have been fighting an invasion by Saudi Arabia. They've been fighting to defend their right to pick their own government and not be a colony of the Saudi autocracy. And the U.S. media would like you to believe this is all just a proxy war with Iran. No. The only reason the people of Yemen are fighting for their country is because they're agents of Iran. The evil Iranians are making them do it. Well, that's not the case, because if that was the case, the war would have been over in a week or 2 weeks. It wouldn't have lasted 5 years. All throughout Yemeni society, among Sunnis, among Shia, among religious and secular Yemenis, among urban Yemenis and rural Yemenis, there is a deep feeling that they want their country to be lifted up from poverty. They don't want to be poor any longer. They don't want to be impoverished any longer. They want to start using their oil to build up their economy and raise their people out of poverty. They want to, take ownership over their country and over their nation. And there are different factions. It's a broad coalition resisting the Saudi attack. There's the Ansar Allah group, right, which is the Houthis. That's what they're called in media, the Houthis, right, which is they're Zaydi Shia Muslims who live in the northern part of the country. But there are also feminists from the Arab Spring Party. There are also Marxists in the Southern movement that seek to restore the Democratic People's Republic of Yemen in the south, the socialist Marxist-Leninist government that existed in Yemen for a long time. There's Arab nationalists, Ba'athist Arab socialists, Nasserists. It's a broad coalition of people who are resisting the Yemeni onslaught, the Saudi onslaught into Yemen. And the people of Yemen are fighting back very, 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 very heroically. Around the clock, they are fighting back. It is a revolutionary committee, a people's assembly movement, fighting to take control of their country. Look, the Saudis claim that Mansour Hadi is the legitimate president of Yemen. But the election in which Mansour Hadi was selected to rule Saudi Arabia only had one candidate on the ballot. All the people in Yemen who rose up and toppled the dictatorship during the Arab Spring, all those people were basically disenfranchised, prevented from running in the elections, and Saudi Arabia appointed their puppet, Mansour Hadi, to rule over the Saudi people. Well, the Houthis, the Ansar Allah movement, the Yemeni people, the socialists, the communists, the Arab nationalists, none of them are going to stand for that. They don't want to be a colony any longer. Yemen is the Vietnam of the 21st century, right? It is the Vietnam of 2020 because a deeply impoverished people, Bedouin, rural people, are picking up guns and fighting for their nation, fighting for their country, fighting for liberation from the Saudi autocracy and the global capitalist system of Wall Street bankers and billionaires that backs it up. It's a revolutionary movement in Yemen, and the people are fighting around the clock. You know, there's malnutrition there. People are starving to death because of the Saudi blockade and the Saudi bombing of the country, but yet they continue to resist. And it is a great honor, I feel, that I was able to participate in a humanitarian mission of the Red Crescent Society of the Islamic Republic of Iran in 2015. I got on a ship. The ship left from Bandar Abbas in southern Iran, and I had the great honor of getting on that ship with Iranian doctors and Iranian surgeons and Iranian medical volunteers. And for 13 days on this ship loaded full of flour and medicine, I got to participate in a humanitarian mission, trying to reach Yemen and aid the Yemeni people. And we were aiming to reach the port of Hodeidah, which is a port at that point that was controlled by the revolutionary forces in Yemen, to deliver the medical supplies. The surgeons were all ready to start performing surgery. The doctors were ready to start treating the people who'd been injured. The flour was ready to start feeding people. And we were unable to reach Yemen because the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia bombed the port of Hodeidah 8 times in a single day. Killed a number of dock workers. 2 days after they bombed the port of Hodeidah, 2 days after we were supposed to arrive, they bombed the medical university in Hodeidah and killed students at the medical university as retaliation for the fact that we were trying to come there and bring them medicine. DOTP/Bolivia. It was quite a life-changing experience for me to go on that ship with those medical students, medical volunteers, to try and reach Yemen and bring humanitarian aid. And it was a deep honor, a deep, deep honor that I was able to participate in that mission, even though we weren't able to actually reach Yemen. That ship created an international incident. My name was everywhere. I mean, the Financial Times and the Associated Press, and the fact that there was an American, a U.S. citizen on the ship, it might have saved our lives, right? If the Saudis could get away with murdering a whole shipload of doctors and medical volunteers, they would do it. But there was an American on the ship, and so by being there as an American, I was able to help protect this medical mission. And that was a deep honor. And there were all kinds of rumors in the international media that our ship was carrying weapons, to deliver weapons to the Houthis. And that was not the case, because we ended up docking the ship, we ended up docking in Djibouti, and we allowed our ship to be inspected by United Nations Relief Works Agency folks. We turned over all the medical aid and all the food aid to the United Nations Relief Works Agency, and they saw it was a big lie. It was just a big lie that our ship had been carrying weapons. Our ship had not been carrying weapons. It was a Red Crescent Society humanitarian mission, and the Saudis blocked it. And to prevent the delivering of humanitarian aid in a time of war, in the time of a crisis, is a war crime. And what the Saudis did by preventing me and this ship full of Iranian medical volunteers from reaching Yemen and delivering humanitarian supplies and aid, what they committed was a war crime. But of course, it's not the only war crime. They've blown up schools full of children in Yemen. They've destroyed the power plants. They've destroyed the water purification facilities. They are committing horrendous crimes against the people of Yemen, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the mass murdering regime that is armed by the U.S. government right now. And the people of Yemen should be in our hearts. I mean, and we should be raising this. We should not allow the media to black out what is happening in Yemen, to pretend it's not there, to pretend it's not happening. It's happening, folks. The people of Yemen are enduring all hell and high water. The imperialists and the mass murdering oil monopolies, the big bankers, Israel, Wall Street, the entire imperialist apparatus is unloading on Yemen to try and beat that country down into submission. But the people of Yemen are not going to surrender. They are fighting back and resisting, and they are an inspiration to all people in the world. They are just an inspiration to all of us, right? We should all be praying for Yemen. We should all be thinking about Yemen, and we should all be, giving every ounce of strength and support to the Yemeni people as possible, because this is a struggle against imperialism. I was able to do what I could with the humanitarian mission, but I wish I could do more. And I wish other people could do more. And I wish that the people of Yemen would know that they're not forgotten. They probably feel like they're all alone there. They probably feel like no one in the world cares about them. Well, there are people all over the world who realize that the Saudis and their U.S. backers and Wall Street in London are wrong, and the Yemeni people are right. The Yemeni people are right. The Wall Street imperialists are wrong. The people of Yemen want their liberation and their freedom, and they are fighting for it, and the Wall Street monopolists and imperialists should not be able to take it away from them. The imperialists are wrong, the Saudis are wrong, Israel is wrong, Wall Street is wrong, the big oil companies and big monopolies are wrong, and the people of Yemen and their struggle for liberation are right. And that needs to be repeated over and over and over again, right? I quote from the Little Red Book by Mao Zedong when he says, "The people of a small country can surely defeat aggression by a big country, but only if they dare to rise in struggle, for this is a law of history." And if you look at what's happening in Yemen, the people are rising in struggle, and they are fulfilling a law of history, defeating the imperialists. And I am convinced that soon the imperialists in Saudi, the Saudi puppets of imperialism and Western imperialism will be defeated, and that Yemen will begin to have an independent government, will break out of Western capitalism and begin to develop some form of economic independence, whether it be an Islamic socialist economy or whatever they want. Whatever the Yemeni people want for their country, that's what I stand for. And I oppose the imperialists. I believe in self-determination. So please don't forget the people of Yemen, because right now they are suffering and they are facing an all-out onslaught. So there you go. Now I'm drinking the famous unnamed diet beverage. This is a little bit different than the unnamed diet beverage I normally drink. Actually, this is unnamed zero beverage, so it tastes slightly different. It's unnamed zero beverage rather than unnamed diet beverage. Just unique circumstances, I ended up having to drink unnamed zero beverage. So there you go. What a wild world this is. But how are folks doing there? How are folks doing? Now, I'm also very excited that tomorrow I'm going to have the opportunity to talk with David Fox and Dust James. David Fox and Dust James, great guys. They have a YouTube channel. Dust James has been doing his Anti-Imperialist America. David Fox is in Australia, and he's been doing a lot of great, working class reporting. And I'm actually going to have the pleasure of streaming with both of them, and that's going to be amazing. Listening to the breakdown of foreign policy of Joe Biden seems bipartisan. Bipartisan for removal of U.S. troops from the Middle East. Thoughts for covert special ops. Thoughts. Well, actually, Jared, I'll just answer your super chat question now. It looks like there is a big fear on the part of the ruling class right now that Donald Trump will use his last few months in office, his last little bit in office, to remove the U.S. troops from Afghanistan. And the ruling class right now is kind of in an overdrive, playing up how important it is that the U.S. continue to occupy Afghanistan. NPR ran a propaganda piece recently about a women's soccer team in Afghanistan. It said, if it wasn't for the U.S., invading Afghanistan and having the military there would be no women's soccer team because these Afghans are so primitive and backward and barbaric. If it weren't for our great Western imperialist chauvinist ways educating these savages, why there would never be a women's soccer team in Afghanistan. And you know what I say to that? I say, bullshit. Why? Because back in 1978, there were plenty of women's soccer teams in Afghanistan. Back in 1978, women in Afghanistan were involved in literacy campaigns. The reason that the Taliban even came into existence is because of the United States. Right? The people of Afghanistan aren't primitive. They're not barbarians. They're not savages. They were so civilized and so revolutionary that in 1978 they toppled the capitalist government and brought the People's Democratic Party to power. They created the People's Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, and they were beginning to move towards socialism. And with the help of the Soviet Union, they started reforesting the country because the British Empire had cut down all their trees and deforested the country. So they started regrowing, and replanting trees and trying to reforest the country because they have rare wood in Afghanistan. There's some of the most rare, wood, and that would be a valuable export. With the help of the Soviet Union, they set up, agriculture. There were literacy volunteers where the People's Democratic Party mobilized the young people in the cities, the college students, to go across the countryside, teaching Afghan people who were illiterate how to read. And it was the imperialists, it was Wall Street and the Pentagon that armed the Mujahideen, Osama bin Laden, al-Zarqawi, Saudis, and sent them to Afghanistan to wage the horrendous war against the People's Democratic Party. So the whole premise of this NPR story is just malarkey, right? Just malarkey. But there is a big fear on the part of the imperialists that somehow Trump will use his last moments in the White House to pull the troops out of Afghanistan, as he has hinted he wants to do, and they don't want to let that happen. Joe Biden doesn't want to let that happen. Wall Street doesn't want to let that happen. Well, it needs to happen. The U.S. imperialists, Wall Street monopolists, the Pentagon needs to get the hell out of Afghanistan. Get out of Afghanistan. Get out of Afghanistan. Right? Right? I mean, the Taliban was bad. But, the Taliban, they did one thing. They cracked down on the heroin trade. They stopped the drug trade. But as soon as the Taliban was overthrown, the drug trade set up shop. The majority of the world's heroin comes from Afghanistan. The majority of the world's heroin comes from Afghanistan. Bet you didn't know that, right? But since the USA has been occupying Afghanistan, it has become the heroin center of the world. Poppy fields have been set up in Afghanistan, and drug dealers have set up in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda is in Afghanistan. ISIS is in Afghanistan, right? The U.S. military presence in Afghanistan has not brought stability. It has brought, further instability, right? And the U.S. presence in Afghanistan has made life worse, made life unstable. So, the USA is not in Afghanistan to protect women's soccer teams. The USA is in Afghanistan for the purpose of keeping it unstable. Why? Because Afghanistan is at the center of Eurasia. Look at a map, right? Afghanistan borders Iran, it borders China, and it borders Russia, right? And that instability in Afghanistan, the drug cartels, the terrorist groups, is causing problems in southern Russia. It's causing problems in Iran, and it's causing problems in China. The knife attacks, the Al-Qaeda-like terrorist groups that have set up shop among the Uyghurs in China, the separatist groups in Iran that have been conducting bombings, groups like Jindallah, right? The heroin gangs and the terrorist separatist groups in Russia, right? Russia, Iran, and China all have a problem because the USA is keeping its military in Afghanistan and trying its best to keep Afghanistan as a strategic center of instability. That is what the United States is doing. It has seen Afghanistan as a strategic center of instability. And the United States has been destabilizing Afghanistan. Ever since the USA invaded, Afghanistan has been getting less and less stable. So do not believe that the USA is occupying Afghanistan for the purpose of bringing peace or bringing security or bringing protection. That is malarkey. So there you go. But what else is on people's minds today? I saw there was a question, someone asked about how do you distinguish between dictatorship of the proletariat and governments like Bolivia? Now that was a super chat question I received. I don't. And I actually think that the Soviet model is a little bit outdated. The idea that the government has to be seized, in a violent revolution and establish a one-party state that is a little bit outdated, right? In Venezuela is a socialist country right now. There is opposition there, but the means of production, it's all centered around the oil. The oil is controlled by the state controls the military is trained in Cuba. Venezuela is a socialist country. They say they're on the socialist road. They argue they're not fully developed enough to be socialist, but they're moving towards socialism. But I would say it's not a capitalist country, and the same for Bolivia, right? And that 21st century socialism is a little bit different than Cold War, style Marxist-Leninist socialism, right? And that, I study and I probably draw the most from Marxism-Leninism ideologically, but Bolivarianism, it draws from Marxism, it draws from Fidel Castro, it draws from Christianity, and I think Ba'athist Arab socialism is very important, and I think that, socialism with Chinese characteristics is very important. And in my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, I discuss this, and I discuss how socialism has changed since the Cold War. And it is a pet peeve of mine when people sit there and declare, well, no countries except for China and Vietnam and Laos are socialist, because only in those countries are they fulfilling the agenda of, that's ridiculous, right? That the notion that if you don't copy the Cold War model, you're not really a socialist country is ridiculous, right? Reality is not defined by words, right? This is the difference between Marxism and idealism, right? Marxism is a materialist philosophy. Idealism is contrary to that, right? Words don't define reality. Reality defines words. And just because you say your country has the magic words, Marxist, Leninist, it becomes socialist. But if a country doesn't say the magic words, they're not socialist. That's ridiculous, right? I would say Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua are socialist countries. And that socialism can come into existence in different ways. It's not all going to be explicitly Marxist-Leninist socialism. As the Communist Manifesto says, right? The path will be different in different countries. So yes, and obviously one needs to change the state apparatus. In Venezuela, they changed the state apparatus with a new constitution. They reorganized the military. In Bolivia, when Evo Morales came in, he had a new constitution, but he did not change the military enough. And that should be the first thing that the president of Venezuela, the new president of Bolivia, does, is he needs to change the military. The state is the military, right? The state is really a body of armed men, right? That is the nature of the state. And in Venezuela, they have changed the nature of the state. They have changed the military completely. In Bolivia, they didn't do that. Well, they should be doing that, right? Because the population is fully behind Evo Morales and socialism. But the military was compromised and was serving the old states. They should have changed the military. In Nicaragua, they have changed the military, right? It's the Sandinista military in Nicaragua, right? And that is an important thing. In a revolution, you must change the nature of the state. And that usually involves building a network of local organizations. In Russia, they called them Soviets. In China, they had peasant associations, right? In Cuba, they call them committees to defend the revolution. In Iran, they have what's called the Basij councils, right? In Venezuela, they call them Bolivarian circles. And they have another name for them. I think they're called popular committees in Nicaragua. But the process of changing the state and making the state a socialist state and not a capitalist state involves building a huge network of people that are mobilized to carry out the goals of the revolution on a local level. And every revolution that actually changes the state has done that. You'll notice that Salvador Allende in Chile, he didn't change the military. He didn't build a network of local councils. He did not really change the state. He enacted some progressive economic policies, but the state apparatus was not changed. And so that's an important thing. And the revolutionary process involves building a new state apparatus. And they've done that in Venezuela, and that's why their revolution is secure. And in Bolivia, they've taken hold of the state, and they've changed in some ways, but they did not fully change the state. They need to change the way their military works. They need to change the way their local police work. And in order to do that, then the revolution will be secure. And that's what the new president, Louis Aker, he needs to do. And this is after the Iranian Revolution. They created the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They created the Basij councils to secure the revolutionary government and in its ability to stay in power. They changed the nature of the state, and this is what happens in a revolution. You must change the nature of the state. That doesn't mean you have to have a civil war. That doesn't mean you have to have a big bunch of bloodshed and killing, but the apparatus of the state, the way the military and the police and the legal system work, must be changed. And let me add that the Wall Street Journal and a number of academic publications right now have really spelled out what the American imperialists and what the capitalists of the world mean by democracy. Because they've been emphasizing this theme in academia right now, in international politics and stuff. They talk about what they call democratic regression and illiberalism, right? And it's a big thing. If you're studying political science now, especially international politics, all kinds of papers and studies and academic works are being published about illiberalism and democratic regression. And it's bullshit. It's a bullshit concept. But basically what it is they talk that the two case studies are Venezuela and Russia. And they say in Venezuela, it was a democratic country, and the people voted for Hugo Chavez, but Chavez changed society, and he changed the nature of the independent institutions of society. Good, right? But they say it's not democratic somehow. If someone gets elected, and then based on getting elected, they change the nature of the military, they change the nature of the police, they change the nature of the economy, they change the nature of the intelligence agencies. According to the Wall Street Journal, and according to liberal academia, and according to the people who head up the political science departments at Yale and Harvard, the country is no longer democratic. It has stopped being democratic because the elected leader changed society. Well, the reason that Hugo Chavez changed society was because that's what the Venezuelan people wanted. They wanted to move towards socialism. They wanted it. They voted for it, and he proceeded to do it. But because he did that, they say that's democratic regression, right? And the same thing happened in Russia. Russia was a nightmare in the 1990s. Boris Yeltsin was wrecking the country, right? Free market policies allowed the country to be looted. There was mass poverty, mass suffering. It was a nightmare. Free market capitalism in Russia in the 90s was a nightmare. So the population voted for Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin was very clear about what he was going to do. He was going to restructure the economy around state control of oil and gas and bring stability. And he did it, right? And he changed the nature of the police. He changed the nature of the military, because the police and the military and the secret services in Russia had all been basically collaborating with the American imperialists and with the West and allowing the country to be looted. Well, Putin came in there and he changed the nature of the state, right? He changed that. He said, no, we're not going to have our military and our secret service and our police and our courts just do whatever Wall Street wants. We're going to start having a government that serves Russia. Well, even though the people of Russia voted for that overwhelmingly and wanted that desperately to get out of the nightmare of Boris Yeltsin, according to Western academics, according to Foreign Affairs and the Council on Foreign Relations, Russia had democratic regression and illiberalism. See, it's not democratic if they lose. Basically, in their definition of democracy, means they always win. That's what democracy means to Wall Street and London. It means they win, right? If the people vote for something different and an elected leader gets in there and changes society, according to them, they have these buzzwords. That's illiberalism. That's democratic regression. No, it's not. It's democratic expansionism. You know, Bolivia, Venezuela, Nicaragua are more democratic as the result of socialism. Russia is more democratic as a result of Putin, right? There is more involvement by the population. If you go to Venezuela, the people are heavily involved in defending the revolution. Under the old regime, they just sat back in fear of the military and the police. But in Venezuela now, there are collectivos and communes. The people are heavily involved in running the society. And the same goes for any anti-imperialist state, right? So, if you look at Iran, they have the Basij councils, and in every neighborhood and every community, they have committees that work very, very hard to defend the revolution, right? And that illiberalism, what they call illiberalism, what they call democratic regression, is far more democratic. It's far more democratic than what was there before, because democracy means the rule of the people. And if the people are not involved in politics, if the people are not getting their voice heard, if the people are just sitting back and letting the country be run by big bankers and Wall Street corporations, if the people are terrified of getting involved in politics, that's not democracy. But when you have a mass upsurge of the population being mobilized, right, to bring a new country, that is democracy, right? And that what we call illiberalism, governments that fight for their population, depend on mass movements of the people. They depend on a highly mobilized and trained population. And I've seen that. Venezuela would not be in power right now if they did not have a very, very well-trained, organized, mobilized population to back them up. Maduro wouldn't be in office right now. You know, Evo Morales and the socialists in Bolivia, they would not be in office. They would not be in power if they didn't have a huge, organized mass movement of everyday Bolivians getting involved in the political process to support the goals of the movement towards socialism party, right? The same goes for the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party has 90 million members, 90 million. Every apartment building, every farming community, every neighborhood that has Communist Party members there that are involved in politics in a local way, enforcing and pushing the agenda of the Communist Party, pushing the plan and the program of the revolution, right? That these illiberal regimes, these democratic regressions, are far more democratic in their actual nature, right? And that's simply the reality. Now, in some cases, these countries don't have the level of freedom of speech that we have in the West, or the level of freedom of assembly, but democracy in and of itself simply means the rule of the people. Are the people's will being enacted? And if you look at these countries that have resisted Western imperialism, they are more democratic in that sense. Look at the situation here in the United States, right? I mean, politics to us is we get to vote every 4 years. I don't really think you appreciate how hopeless things are. I'll try to be more hopeless for you. No, but no, look at the United States. It's supposed to be a democracy. We just had an election here in the United States. And we had two choices, right? All the other candidates were treated as irrelevant and fringe. We had two choices that were respected. Those two choices were both wealthy people, and the media basically picked them for us. And one of the vice presidential candidates, Kamala Harris, was somebody the public had overwhelmingly voted against, but she's back on the ticket and she's likely to be president. Kamala Harris is a large, looming example of how undemocratic the United States is. When the Democratic primary happened, Kamala Harris got a very, 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 very low percentage of the vote. Very, very low percentage of the vote. Very, very low percentage of the vote. But certain factions in Silicon Valley, certain factions on Wall Street picked her. And Joe Biden was the candidate who won most of the votes in the Democratic primary, but he's old. And he's, as a result, we're probably going to have a President Kamala Harris pretty soon. We're going to have President Joe Biden pretty soon. We're probably going to have a President Kamala Harris. Even though the people of the country are disgusted by her record, even though she comes across as fake and lying, we're going to get Kamala Harris ruling over us for the next little bit, probably. Joe Biden will be the oldest president in history, 82 years old. He's going to step down at some point. I don't see him finishing his 4-year term. And we're going to have President Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris, even though the people voted against her, that's who we're going to get as a country. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. In the United States, they say we have a pure democracy. But at the end of the day, the people with the money and the wealth, they set public opinion, they set discourse, right? A lot of people say that Iran is undemocratic because of something called the Guardian Council, right? They have a body in Iran that approves the candidates, right? When people run for office in Iran, they have to be approved by the Guardian Council, right? They have to make sure that they're loyal to the Islamic Revolution and the teachings and the foundations of the Islamic Revolution. Well, in the United States, we have the same thing, and it's called Wall Street, and it's called big corporations. Before somebody runs for office, the big corporations and Wall Street and the intelligence agencies and the Pentagon, they all make sure that they're loyal, right? We call it pure democracy, but it's actually a rule by the people who have the most money. So at the end of the day, which is more democratic? Vetting the candidates to make sure that they're in line with the goals of the revolution that the Iranian people fought and died for, or rich people and militarists and spy agencies vetting the candidates to make sure they're not going to change anything and they're going to keep this small elite at the top of U.S. society, right? All democracy is guided. All democracy is guided. There's no pure democracy in the world right now. As long as society is divided into classes, as long as some people own the means of production and some people work in the means of production, as long as there is a division of classes, there's going to be some level of dictatorship by one class, right? So the question is, which class is exercising its dictatorship, right? And should it be a revolutionary government that represents the majority of people and has a well-organized network of people, or should the government represent the rich and powerful, right? And pure democracy will only come as we move toward a society without a small elite, as we move toward a society with a rationally planned economy, and as abundance expands. So I think that's very, very important. Look, folks, I am not a fan of Kamala Harris. I wrote a book about Kamala Harris and the Future of America. I hope people check it out. It's a very important book, but Kamala Harris is a very scary person. She's a very, very, very scary person. She's tied to the people who carried out the Arab Spring. She was selected by the forces that carried out the Arab Spring, and it's very disturbing what could be the reality for the next 4 years. But folks, if you have any more super chat questions, throw them my way. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be on here. Maybe 20 more minutes I'll probably be on here. This isn't going to be a long live. But to pass the time on the afternoon, I thought I might hop on here and just give a few remarks before I'm on my way and off to enjoy my Friday evening. Not much of a Friday evening in New York City anymore, though, unfortunately. New York City with the pandemic, there's a very good chance we're going to lock down pretty soon because the cases continue to rise. I'm not going anyplace special tonight, but I'm just I'm here at work, and I thought I might jump into the conference room and just have a conversation with all of you and engage with all of you. So there you go. Yeah, so if anyone has a super chat question, I will give super chat questions the priority, and we'll go from there. You know, anything else on people's minds? Anything else on people's minds today? Any questions I can answer before I'm on my way after this lovely YouTube conversation? Anything else on people's minds today? Plenty of unnamed zero beverage. Do you know about Durkheim and Anami? I do know about Durkheim because in college I studied sociology. And Durkheim is one of the founders of modern sociology. And he studied suicide and why do people kill themselves in Europe, right? At the time of the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, one of the first major works of sociology was Durkheim, who was a sociologist, studied the phenomenon of suicide. And he discovered that basically people from rural areas were moving to cities, and they found the cities to be very lonely. They didn't have a community to depend on. They felt very isolated. They worked in factories, and they didn't develop a social safety network. They didn't develop a community. They were very lonely, and so the suicide rates were rising in Europe at the time of the Industrial Revolution. That was Durkheim. Durkheim is considered a very, very important sociologist. So I do know about Durkheim. Yes, that's a good question. If anyone here is contemplating suicide, I encourage you to seek the help of a mental health professional. Suicide is a big problem in the United States right now. So if you are a suicidal person, if you are feeling that way, I encourage you to seek out the help of a mental health professional. It was a good question you asked. Why don't we do our roll call? I will call out names and locations as I see you. Names and locations. Who's with us today? Who's with us today? I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who's with us? Who is with us today? Mom's Basement, New Jersey. Who else? James Hazel is with us. Very good. Who else is with us today? Who else is with us today? Kendall in San Diego. JT24 in Mississippi. Leipzig in East Germany. Mora, New York. JT24 in Mississippi. James in Pennsylvania. Matthew in Sydney, Australia. England, Rod Dog. Okay. Starting a media station. Chicago, somewhere the USA. England, Joe in Exeter, UK. Cleveland, Pirate Anthony Penza. Gotham, Sweden, or Gothenburg, Sweden. Dallas, Kentucky, Tim Stacy. Keith from Quincy, Massachusetts. Good to meet you, Keith. Argentina, Mo in Toronto, Canada. Cheers from Frankfurt. Donovan in Iowa. Seattle, Washington. Huntsville, Alabama. Dan in Pennsylvania. Salute you, Mr. Shaden. Michael from Strasbourg, France. Anthony in Texas. Auckland, New Zealand. Wisconsin, Denver. Colin from Columbus, Ohio. Why don't the American people make a revolution? That's a good question. Oakland, California. Drayton, the Netherlands. California. Very good. Very, very, very good. Very, very, very good. Very good. Who else is with us? Near Seattle, Gothenburg. Arlington, Virginia. Raleigh. Very good. Very, very good. Glad you're all with us today. Like I said, Mohsen is from Iran. He's with us. People's Democratic Republic of California. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff. Why don't the people of America make a revolution? Because they don't have revolutionary ideology. London, United Kingdom, Harold in Florida. They don't have revolutionary ideology. They don't understand what that would mean. And a lot of the working class people of the United States are very, very confused, and they don't know what it would mean to make a revolution. And they fear chaos. Right? The thing is that in the mind of many American people, revolution is associated with chaos. It's associated with chaos and destruction. But the reality is that revolution is about bringing order. It's the old system that creates chaos. And it's the revolution that brings order. Revolutions don't create chaos, they create order. Right? It's the old system that's falling apart that creates the chaos. And revolution is when the order is restored. In fact, the word revolution, it's very interesting. It comes from the word in Latin that means to turn around. And it used to just mean if you turned around, if you did a turn, that was called you did a revolution, right? It didn't take on a political connotation until the time, I'm not going to talk about that, until the time of the, well, actually, you know what? We'll talk about that. It didn't take on a political connotation until the time of the French Revolution and the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church argued that the earth was the center of the universe. And if you were somebody who did not agree with that, if you didn't agree that the earth was the center of the universe, if you believed the earth revolved around the sun, you were a revolutionary. And that's where the term came from. And it took on a political connotation because across Europe, the revolutionaries were overthrowing the feudal order that the Roman Catholic Church propped up. It was originally referred to science, and then it became a political term. But as far as the protocols of the Elders of Zion, that's a forgery, right? It's a forgery. It was published at the time in Russia. The Tsar and his government were persecuting Jewish people, and they published a document called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion to justify their anti-Semitic persecutions. We've been called into a meeting this morning over a strike, so I do a quick live chat. Very good, David. You know, stay strong out there on the picket lines in Australia, David. That's David Fox, good friend of us. He's out there on the picket lines. You know, stay strong, David. But yes, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, you know, it was a forged document that was created to justify the persecution of Jews in Russia. And the document basically is a defense of feudalism. Have you ever tried to go on the Young Turks? Of course, I'd love that. Yeah, I doubt they would have me on, but if they would have me on, I would go on in a second. Make it happen. Tweet at them. Drive them crazy. Make them have me on. But yeah, and it's basically, it argues that all the revolutions to overthrow feudalism are all a big conspiracy by Jews. And the thing about the Protocols of the Elders of Zion that I have the most problem with is that, like, one of the steps is give every person the right to vote. You know, so it's like, if you take that document seriously, we should not be allowed to vote now because that's a Jewish conspiracy or something. So, you know, I think it's an anti-Semitic piece. It's been used to justify the persecution of Jews. It's a forgery. And the other thing you have to remember is that, you know, Judaism is a very, very diverse faith. I think there is a large number of Jewish people that are atheists, that are cultural Jews, but they are not religious. On top of that, you have Orthodox Jews, you have Reformed Jews, you have liberal Jews, right? Right, you have Orthodox Jews, conservative Jews, and Reformed Jews, right? So even within Judaism, there is no. Oh, I guess I have to turn the painting back on. Look at that. Even within Judaism, there's no body like that, right? That would declare some conspiracy that all Jews would be part of. So the document is it's a forgery, and it's deeply unfortunate that it remains in circulation, in publication, because it's not scientific thinking, right? You know, Zionism, in my view, is very evil, but the Jewish people are just people, and the Jewish religion is just a religion. Zionism is a political ideology that justifies the existence of Israel and justifies Israel's crimes. But Judaism is a religion, the Jewish people are an ethnic group, and that we shouldn't hate anyone on the basis of their religion or their ethnicity, right? And so, you know, anti-Semitism, which is the hatred of Jews for being Jews, for practicing their religion, or for simply being members of an ethnic group, is wrong, just like any form of racism is wrong, right? So I think that I encourage people around the world that are anti-imperialist and socialist, they need to, instead of thinking in racist terms, instead of thinking in bigoted terms, to think in scientific and dialectical materialist terms. So I don't approve of the document that you just mentioned. I don't approve of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. I think it's a forgery, and I think it is reinforcing bigoted thinking. I want people to think in material terms. I don't want people to think in terms of my race, right? You're smarter than that, right? Bigotry is very, very primitive. I'm not familiar with that person you just named, Days of War. I'm just not familiar with him, so I can't really answer that question. You know, I thought you meant Bastiat, the libertarian, but you spelled it differently, so that's not, I don't know the name. I don't know who you're referring to. But if anyone else has a super chat question, be sure to throw it my way. be sure to throw it my way. I'll happily answer it. I even answered that one. I didn't want to answer Neon Noir's question at first, but I just answered it. I don't approve of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and I wish it was not circulating. Um, you know, I'm glad people are watching from Iran. Iran is an amazing country. I wish I could return to Iran. I got to visit Iran. I made a documentary in Iran, and Iran is amazing, and it changed my life so much. I'm a different person because of my experiences in Iran. It was just an amazing opportunity that I had as an American to visit Iran, to spend time with Iranians, to understand. And I didn't just see the capital. I saw all over Iran. I visited Isfahan. I visited Mashhad. I visited Bandar Abbas, and I learned from being in Iran. And I really learned a lot about myself when I was in Iran. And so, the ability that I had to visit Iran and learn from the Iranian people was deeply, deeply important. And I'm really glad I had that opportunity. It was really, really a privilege. And I hope that someday I can return to Iran. Right now with COVID and things, I won't be able to go. And right now with the political situation, but I hope that at some point, somehow, there can be a better relationship between Americans and Iranians. And if that happens, I'll be able to visit the country once again, because it was a life-changing experience. You have something very special in Iran, you really do. By breaking free from imperialism, the Iranians have been able to develop and build highways and raise their people out of poverty and wipe out illiteracy. And the Iranian people, they don't recognize what they have, but by having a revolution and breaking out of the Western capitalist system and seizing control of their own economy, and putting their religious principles and their ideology and their society ahead of the profits of Western bankers, they have really, really, benefited. The population has benefited. I mean, Iranians live much better than many people throughout the world do, and it's because they've broken free. And I met with many wealthy Iranians when I was in Iran who don't understand that. And they are convinced that if only Iran were to give up its revolution, that Iran could be just like the United States and just like Europe or something. They don't seem to understand that no, the system based in the United States is what keeps countries around the world poor. Euro-Maidan color revolution in Ukraine. Yeah, well, there was a government in Ukraine. Was there a lot of corruption there? Of course. There's corruption in Ukraine, but the United States and the CIA and the National Endowment for Democracy and the U.S. Embassy they mobilized an uprising in Ukraine to destabilize the country and to try and bring Ukraine into the European Union. And they toppled the elected government, and they utilized some very extreme far right-wing organizations to do it. A lot of groups that admire Stepan Bandera, who was a Nazi collaborator during World War II, a lot of far right groups, and they toppled the government of Ukraine in 2014. And after the Ukrainian government was toppled, Ukraine has been divided. The people of the eastern regions and Donbass, they want more autonomy. So there you go. Thoughts on Noam Chomsky? Well, Noam Chomsky is a very important intellectual. He's a critic of U.S. foreign policy, or at least he was a critic of U.S. foreign policy during the Cold War. He was very critical of U.S. moves in the Middle East, very critical of U.S. moves in Latin America. His background is linguistics, but starting during the Vietnam War, he started to criticize U.S. foreign policy from kind of a left-wing social democratic perspective. Noam Chomsky calls himself an anarchist, but I've always maintained that Noam Chomsky is actually a social democrat, because anarchism is the belief that there should not be any political action, and that you can create a non-capitalist society without any state involvement, purely on a voluntary basis. Whereas Noam Chomsky calls for people to vote for the Democratic Party. Noam Chomsky supports the labor bureaucracy and the AFL-CIO. So Noam Chomsky is a social democratic intellectual, is what I would call him. And I will say that since the Cold War, his anti-imperialism has really been eroded. He's said some things about Syria that are horrendous, I think. He's said some things about, about a lot of conflicts around the world that are not correct. He was really adamant that everyone should vote for Joe Biden in this last election. I don't agree with that. But he is a left-wing intellectual in the United States. And, overwhelmingly, he plays a positive role. I mean, he's criticized U.S. foreign policy. He criticizes American capitalism. Unfortunately, I think that, just like Amy Goodman, just like a lot of the synthetic left, as the left becomes the voice promoting war in the United States, as wars are sold in a left-wing manner rather than a right-wing manner, as it's the left wing that promotes war with Samantha Power and others, as that becomes the situation, as a result of that, we have a situation where people like Noam Chomsky, people like Amy Goodman are not as anti-war as they once were. And they are much more in promoting interventionism, which is deeply problematic. But Chomsky overwhelmingly, throughout the Vietnam War, throughout the 80s and 90s, he played a very positive role. I will quote him in my writing, was the one-child policy Malthusian? It may have been. I don't know enough about the one-child policy in China. I've heard that there was an influence on China by the family, the estate of Henry Wallace and the Wallace Global Fund, and then they may have pushed for the one-child policy. But I've also heard that the one-child policy in China was specifically related to the countryside, and it was related to the population in the rural areas of China and the fear of some kind of rural bourgeoisie or rural capitalist class developing. But I don't know the specific details of the one-child policy, so I can't really comment on that. Do you consider yourself a Christian socialist? Are the two complementary? Well, I consider myself to be a Christian, and I consider myself to be a socialist. I don't know if I would call myself a Christian socialist. Christian socialism is a specific ideology, right? It's a specific belief system that emerged in Germany and in France in the 1800s. It was a movement of Christian pastors who wanted to create socialism on the basis of the Christian faith. And they were very opposed to Marxism, Christian socialism. And actually, it's kind of interesting. Adolf Hitler was briefly a Christian socialist. Adolf Hitler, his political trajectory was that he was a pan-Germanist first. He was trying to merge Austria with Germany, and so he joined the pan-Germanist movement, and then he joined the Christian Socialist movement, and eventually he started the Nazi Party. And the Christian Socialist movement is kind of I don't think it's really around anymore. It was kind of a very socially conservative but anti-capitalist movement among Germans, and I think some of them were Catholic. I think it was mainly Protestants, though. And it was a political movement, and I'm not part of that political movement. It's separate from what you call liberation theology, which is a Roman Catholic pro-socialist trend that existed in Latin America and still widely exists. But I am a Christian, and my Christian faith very much walks hand in hand with my belief in socialism. I do study the Bible. I do believe that Jesus Christ's teachings are very much in line with socialism and the goal of creating a stateless, classless world. I consider Jesus Christ to be one of the primary influences on my life and my development. I will say when I was a kid, I hated religion because I was in a very conservative area where everyone was deeply religious, and a lot of the people were evangelicals, and they drove me nuts, and I went to church against my will. Every Sunday. I did not want to go to church, but my parents made me. I did not like that. So as a kid with religion everywhere, and even in my public school, we were getting religion all the time, I had a resentment against religion, and that caused me to be an atheist in my 20s. But as I grew up, as I moved to New York City, and then especially as I traveled internationally, I reestablished my faith in God, and I reestablished my faith in Jesus Christ. And that's a personal journey that all of us have to go on our own, and I think that's the important thing. Religion should be a personal matter and considered to be a personal journey, that no one should be forced against their will to adopt any faith. I believe in religious freedom, and I believe in a secular government. But I personally do consider myself to be a Christian. And I consider myself to be a socialist and a Marxist, but I'm not a hard materialist. The philosophy underlying Marxism is dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism is largely correct, but not 100%. I do believe that in some cases, there are times where the passion of human beings and the spiritual motivations of human beings can override material forces, and that I'm not a hard materialist as Marxists are. So, this is my worldview, but I respect other views, and not only do I respect people that are atheists and have chosen that not to adhere to faith, that is their business, and I respect that. And I myself, there was a time where I was very hostile to religion, so I understand, based on all the evil things many religions have done around the world, why you would be hostile to religion. But on top of that, I also respect Muslims, I respect Jews, I respect people of all different faiths. And that many people, like I said, people have to go on their faith journey on their own. It is a personal journey, and I would never attempt to impose my religion on somebody else against their will. That would be wrong. I would never want anyone to feel forced to adopt religious beliefs that are similar to mine. And I will say that my Christianity is very, very liberal and open-minded. I don't think the Bible is the literal word of God. I think that's outrageous, right? I mean, the earth was not created in 6 days. The earth is millions of years old, not 6,000 years old. But I do believe that there is a God, and I do believe in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and that's a personal journey that I go on. And that's something I encourage you to explore your beliefs, and to come to terms with what motivates you to do what you do in life, what motivates you to take the path that you're on. Right? And for me, it was a recognition of the fact that even though I had renounced religion, even though I had turned my back on religion, that deep down, what motivated me in everything I did, to become a communist activist, to travel around the world, everything I did was motivated by the example of Jesus. That if I had not been taught about the life of Jesus, if I had not seen Jesus's life as the model, if I had not been taught Jesus Christ's teachings, it would have been very unlikely that I would have become an activist and become a revolutionary and become so enamored with revolutionary teachings. So based on that recognition, I realized how important my faith in Christ was, and how, but that's a personal journey. I shouldn't say too much more about this because it's personal, right? And the thing is, what I'm saying could be completely foreign to a lot of the people watching that, and that's okay, because your faith and your faith journey is your business, and I would never want to impose my beliefs on somebody else. So there you go. But thanks for asking. I'm glad that's a good question. There you go. So I'm probably going to wrap this up here, but I do want to say, folks, in a few minutes I'm going to be posting. The talk I did with Dan Kovalik, who is this great writer. I'm going to be posting some other videos. I've got a chat planned with David Fox and Dust James later this weekend. And coming up on November 21st, we are going to have another Center for Political Innovation web conference. It's going to be very exciting. And we're having a patrons-only stream very soon. So patrons, I'm just trying to determine what's the best time to do it. So if you're not signed up on Patreon, the clock is ticking. If you want to be part of the patrons-only stream I'm going to be doing in the next few days, the clock is ticking. Now is the time to sign up on Patreon, because I'm going to be doing a patrons-only stream where I do nothing but answer your questions. So it's going to be great, folks. All my best wishes. Adios. Have a good night.